1937. The world stood on the edge of war. In the skies above China, a handful of Japanese pilots were discovering something terrifying, that their aircraft, once thought unbeatable, were now hopelessly outmatched. American-made Curtiss Hawks and Soviet-supplied I-16 fighters were cutting through Japanese squadrons like knives through silk. Japan's dream of air supremacy was dying before it had even begun. But deep inside a small hangar in Nagoya, a young engineer named Jiro Horikoshi was working on something that would change that forever. Something so light, so agile, and so advanced that when it finally took to the skies, the world would never be the same. This is the story of the Mitsubishi A6M Zero, the plane that made Japan a superpower in the sky, and the secret project that shocked the world. The birth of a dream. Scene transition. Sound of typewriters, clanging metal, engineers murmuring in Japanese. It began with a challenge. In late 1937, the Imperial Japanese Navy issued an impossible order to the Mitsubishi Aircraft Company. Design a carrier-based fighter capable of outclimbing, outturning, and outrunning every enemy aircraft in existence. It had to be faster than 500 kilometers per hour, climb to 3,000 meters in under 3.5 minutes, carry 2 cannons, and still have a range of more than 1,800 kilometers, nearly double that of any Western fighter. American and British designers laughed when they heard those requirements years later. They said it was a fantasy, not an airplane. But to Jiro Horikoshi, it was a challenge and a dream. He was just 32 years old, brilliant, disciplined, and obsessed with aerodynamics. To him, aircraft were not machines, they were living beings. He once wrote, "A fighter should be beautiful, for beauty is the essence of flight." The impossible balance. Horikoshi and his team faced a nightmare. Every other nation building fighters at the time, the US, Britain, Germany, was focused on one thing: armor and firepower. But armor made planes heavy, and a heavy plane couldn't fly far from Japan's island carriers. So Horikoshi did the unthinkable. He sacrificed armor for range, protection for agility, safety for performance. The result was a fighter that could dance in the air, faster, lighter, and deadlier than anything in its class. To achieve that, his team used new lightweight aluminum alloys and innovative flush riveting, reducing drag to levels unseen in any other plane. Every gram was accounted for. Even the paint was applied thinly to save weight. The engineers joked that the Zero's skin was thin as paper, and they weren't far off. A single burst from an enemy machine gun could tear through its fuselage. But that was the price of perfection. The secret flight. Sound effect. Wind rushing over wings. Engine starting up, then silence. April 1st, 1939. A small prototype rolled onto the runway at Mitsubishi's airfield. It looked elegant, almost fragile, but beneath that smooth frame was a monster. The Nakajima Sakai engine, compact yet powerful, roared to life. Test pilot Kitsuzo Shima eased the throttle forward. The plane leapt into the sky. For the next 11 minutes, every man watching below knew they were witnessing something extraordinary. The aircraft climbed faster than any Japanese fighter before it. It turned so sharply that even the test pilot later said, "It felt like part of my own body." When it landed, Horikoshi simply whispered, "She flies as we dreamed." The Allies have no idea. At the time, no one outside Japan even knew the aircraft existed. The world's attention was on Europe, on Hitler's blitzkrieg and the skies over Poland and France. Meanwhile, Japan's Zero project moved in total secrecy. The Allies thought of Japan as a nation of good soldiers, not engineers. Their aircraft were considered outdated copies of Western designs. That illusion would cost them dearly. Baptism of fire. September 13th, 1940. Over the skies of Chongqing, China, a squadron of Japanese Zeros engaged a formation of Soviet-built I-16 fighters flown by Chinese pilots. The result was devastating. In less than 5 minutes, 13 I-16s were destroyed, for the loss of 0 Japanese planes. The Chinese called it the day the sky turned black with death. The Allies dismissed the reports as propaganda. But the truth was clear. A new predator had appeared in the skies. The ghost above Pearl Harbor. A year later, on December 7, 1941, the world finally met the Zero. When Japanese carrier decks opened that morning, 343 aircraft took off. Fighters, bombers, and torpedo planes. But it was the Zero that cleared the skies for them. In less than 2 hours, the U.S. Pacific Fleet was crippled. But what shocked American pilots most wasn't the attack itself. It was how those Zeros flew. They climbed vertically, looped impossibly tight, and attacked from angles no one thought possible. Every dogfight report read the same. Their planes turn faster. They climb better. They shoot us down before we can even aim. American commanders believed they were facing Germany's best. Surely Japan couldn't have built something like this on its own. They were wrong. The fear begins. Scene: U.S. airbase in the Philippines, frantic radio chatter. A week after Pearl Harbor, American P-40 pilots encountered Zeros over the Philippines. Lieutenant Boyd Dodd later recalled, "I saw one coming straight at me. I turned hard left. He followed effortlessly. I dove. He stayed on my tail like smoke. When I pulled out, he was already there, guns flashing." For months, the Zeros dominated the Pacific. No Allied fighter could match their range, maneuverability, or climb. They appeared where no one expected, over Australia, the Dutch East Indies, even the Indian Ocean. It felt supernatural. Pilots began calling them angels of death. The Zero's secret weapon. The secret wasn't just its design, it was also how it was flown. Japanese Navy pilots were among the most highly trained in the world. Before the war, they spent years mastering aerobatics, precision flying, and formation tactics. Each Zero squadron moved like a single organism, coordinated, silent, and ruthless. They used tactics like the thatch weave long before the Americans even gave it a name. And unlike Western pilots, they didn't fear death. To them, dying in battle was the highest honor. Combined with a machine that could outfly anything in the sky, that mindset made them nearly unstoppable. The American wake-up call. By early 1942, the U.S. finally realized it was fighting a different kind of enemy. General Claire Chennault of the Flying Tigers studied the Zero's movements carefully. He wrote, "Don't try to turn with them. Dive away, fight them on speed, not agility." But even that was easier said than done. At low altitudes, the Zero could twist and climb with impossible grace. At high altitudes, it still outperformed most American fighters. The U.S. desperately needed a captured model to understand how this Phantom worked. The plane that landed by mistake. June 4, 1942. During a mission near the Aleutian Islands, a Zero ran out of fuel. Its pilot, Petty Officer Tadayoshi Koga, attempted an emergency landing on Akutan Island, a remote strip of Alaska. The soft marsh swallowed the landing gear. The plane flipped over and killed Koga instantly, but the aircraft itself remained almost completely intact. Weeks later, an American salvage team discovered it. The Akutan Zero was flown to California, repaired, and tested at Edwards Airfield. For the first time, U.S. engineers saw what they were truly up against. They noted its unmatched agility, but also its fatal flaws. No armor, no self-sealing fuel tanks, and a fragile frame. It was both a masterpiece and a death trap, a beautiful mistake. The captured Zero gave the Allies something far more valuable than data. It gave them hope. By understanding its strengths and weaknesses, the Americans began designing tactics and aircraft specifically to destroy it. Planes like the F-6F Hellcat and P-38 Lightning were born out of that knowledge. But that is a story for another day. December 1941, the Pacific burned. Pearl Harbor was only the beginning. In just a few months, Japan's empire stretched farther than any in Asia's history. Hong Kong had fallen. The Philippines were under siege. Singapore, once called the Gibraltar of the East, was about to collapse. And above every battlefield, one shadow ruled the skies. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero. The Empire strikes south. After Pearl Harbor, Japan's expansion was lightning fast. Their fleets struck like thunderbolts, coordinated, relentless, unstoppable. At the center of every air raid was the Zero. Its range was so extraordinary that it could escort bombers hundreds of miles beyond what any Allied plane could reach. From the snowy Aleutians in the north to the steaming jungles of Malaya in the south, pilots whispered the same word in fear: Zero. SFX, radio chatter, Zeros incoming. Zeros incoming. In the skies above the Pacific, American, British, Dutch, and Australian pilots found themselves in a nightmare. Every dogfight turned into a dance with death, and the Zero always led. The Flying Ghost. Scene: cockpit view, rapid breathing, machine guns firing. A U.S. pilot over the Philippines once said, "They came from the sun, silent, gliding, and before you even knew they were there, your plane was on fire." The Zero could climb faster, turn tighter, and dive longer than any Allied fighter in 1942. Its 20mm cannons shredded enemy aircraft with terrifying precision. A single burst could turn a P-40 or Buffalo into a ball of flames. In the first 6 months of the war, Japanese pilots claimed over 2,000 Allied aircraft destroyed. In most cases, they lost fewer than 100. To the Allies, it felt supernatural. To Japan, it was the result of years of discipline and training. The samurai in the sky. The pilots who flew the Zero were not ordinary men. They were naval aviators, elite warriors who saw flying as an extension of Bushido, the samurai code. They believed death in battle was not a tragedy. It was an honor. Before each mission, they would bow toward the east, toward the emperor, and whisper their vow. "If we die today, it shall be for Japan's eternal sky." Their flight formations were masterpieces of coordination, precise, fluid, and ruthless. A Zero unit could engage an entire enemy squadron and still return with barely a scratch. Their confidence bordered on divine. They truly believed no Western pilot could ever defeat them. And for a time, they were right. The fall of Singapore. February 1942, Singapore. British commanders called it impregnable. They believed their anti-aircraft defenses and airfields would hold off Japan's advance. Then the Zeros came. Wave after wave of them tore through the skies, ripping apart British Blenheims and Hurricanes before they could even climb to altitude. Ground troops watched helplessly as their planes burned on the runway. Civilians called it the rain of fire. Within weeks, Singapore fell. It was the largest surrender in British military history, and the Zero had cleared the path. The fall of the Philippines. In the Philippines, American pilots fought with everything they had. They flew outdated P-40 Warhawks and P-35s, knowing they were outclassed. One U.S. pilot, Lieutenant Buzz Wagner, described his first encounter. "I fired a full burst, missed completely. He turned inside me so fast I thought I was fighting smoke. Then he was gone. Just gone." By March 1942, Japanese air superiority was absolute. General Douglas MacArthur was forced to retreat, leaving behind thousands of troops. As his boat departed Corregidor, he looked up at the sky and saw Japanese Zeros patrolling freely. They owned the air. The secret of their power. The Zero's dominance came from two things: ingenious engineering and elite training. Most Japanese naval aviators had over 700 hours of flight experience before combat, compared to an American pilot's 200. They practiced for years in high-G turns, stall recoveries, and formation dogfights. They knew every trick of the sky and how to read their enemies' moves before they made them. But more than that, they flew with faith. Faith in their machines. Faith in their comrades. Faith that their sacrifice would make Japan invincible. The Allies' desperation. By mid-1942, panic had set in. American intelligence began receiving reports of a superplane that could outperform anything they had. The rumors spread fast. "It's made of bamboo. It's so light, bullets go through without detonating. It can hover like a bird." The myths were almost as terrifying as the reality. In desperation, American engineers studied every scrap of wreckage they could find, trying to understand how Japan had built something so revolutionary. But nothing prepared them for what came next. The Battle of Coral Sea. SFX, roar of engines, anti-aircraft fire, alarm sirens blaring. May 1942, the Battle of Coral Sea. It was the first major naval battle in history fought entirely by aircraft. No ships ever saw each other. Only their planes did the fighting, and the Zero was at the center of it all. In swirling dogfights above the Pacific, the Zeros devastated Allied squadrons. Their pilots used hit-and-run tactics, swooping down like falcons, then vanishing into the clouds. One U.S. pilot described the horror. "They came out of nowhere. I fired mist. Then my wingman exploded. The sky was full of black smoke and white circles." Despite the loss of one Japanese carrier, the battle proved one thing. Japan's Zeros could dominate entire fleets. But in the shadows, a shift was beginning. The turning of the tide. June 1942, Midway. Japan sent its largest fleet yet, 4 carriers, hundreds of aircraft, and the best Zero pilots in the world. They expected another easy victory. But this time, the Americans were ready. Thanks to cracked Japanese codes and new tactics, U.S. forces ambushed the fleet. The Zero pilots fought ferociously, claiming dozens of kills. But they couldn't be everywhere at once. By the end of the day, 4 Japanese carriers burned: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu, the same ships that had launched the attack on Pearl Harbor. Japan had lost its finest carriers and hundreds of its most skilled pilots. The Empire would never recover from that loss. The invisible wound. The Zero still ruled the skies after Midway. But something had changed. Its pilots were no longer replaceable. Each man lost was years of experience gone forever, and Japan had no pilot training system to rebuild them quickly. Meanwhile, America began producing fighters faster than Japan could shoot them down. Factories in California and Texas were turning out hundreds of F-4F Wildcats, P-38 Lightnings, and soon F-6F Hellcats. Quantity was beginning to challenge quality. But in 1942, none of that was visible yet. For now, the Zero still flew like a ghost over the Pacific. The spirit of the rising sun. Scene: Japanese carrier deck at sunset. Pilots walking in slow motion toward their planes. A Japanese commander once said, "Our Zero is not merely an aircraft. It is the soul of the empire given wings." To its pilots, flying the Zero wasn't just war, it was poetry. They believed that their speed, precision, and courage represented Japan's divine destiny. They saw themselves as heirs to the samurai, fighting not for victory, but for honor. And for that brief, shining moment in 1942, they seemed unstoppable. Every Allied commander in the Pacific had one fear: the day the sun rose, and the Zeros came with it. By the summer of 1942, the rising sun had reached its highest point. But even at its brightest, the light of an empire begins to fade. The Zero, Japan's angel of the skies, had ruled for nearly 2 years. But now, small cracks were beginning to appear in its legend. And America, humiliated at Pearl Harbor, was about to strike back. The price of perfection. The Zero had been a masterpiece, but it was also a trap. Its light frame, its unmatched maneuverability, its stunning range, all came at a cost. No armor for the pilot. No self-sealing fuel tanks. No room for survival if hit. It was, as one Japanese engineer later admitted, a sword made of glass, sharp enough to cut anything, but doomed to shatter. At the start of the war, these flaws didn't matter. No enemy plane could touch it. But after Midway, with Japan's best pilots gone, the Zero was left in the hands of the inexperienced. And for them, perfection became a curse. The new breed, SFX, roaring factory sounds, rhythmic clanging of metal, workers shouting over engines. Across the Pacific, America was awakening. Factories in California, New York, and Texas were producing aircraft faster than Japan could shoot them down. A single American plant could now build in 1 week what Japan made in a month. The new fighters were stronger, heavier, and, most importantly, protected. Enter the F-6F Hellcat, the P-38 Lightning, and the F-4U Corsair, each designed with one purpose: to kill the Zero. The lessons of war. American pilots who survived early battles began teaching new tactics. Never turn with a Zero. Never dogfight horizontally. Always dive and climb. Use speed, not turns. They called it boom in zoom. Instead of graceful aerial dances, American pilots now fought with brutal precision. Quick dives, powerful bursts, and immediate escape. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. As one pilot put it, the Zero could dance, but we learned how to punch. The Aleutian Test. 1943, the frozen Aleutian Islands, north of Alaska. A strange, brutal battlefield of snow, fog, and ice. Here, the Zero's agility meant nothing. Cold winds froze its engines. Its light frame struggled in turbulence. Its range advantage was useless against the cold Pacific storms. In these skies, American P-38 Lightnings found their first victories. Twin engines, heavy armor, long range, the perfect counter. The myth of the invincible Zero began to fracture. The Guadalcanal turning point. Scene: buzzing jungle insects, distant gunfire, palm trees swaying in the wind. But the true test came in the Solomon Islands, particularly Guadalcanal. Japan's air superiority faced a new challenge: the relentless grind of American logistics. While Japan struggled to supply its few bases, America turned Guadalcanal into an air fortress. Every day, American and Japanese pilots clashed over a narrow strip of land called Henderson Field. The Zeros came from distant bases, flying hours over open ocean. When they arrived, they were low on fuel and exhausted. The Americans, by contrast, launched fresh pilots in waves. If one squadron fell, another was ready. SFX, radio chatter, Hellcats go! Go! For the first time, the Zero's biggest strength, range, had become its weakness. It couldn't fight for long enough to win. The wounded sky. By mid-1943, Japan was losing aircraft faster than it could replace them. But more devastating was the loss of experience. Each fallen pilot represented years of irreplaceable skill. The next generation of aviators trained for only 100 hours, less than half of what it took to master the Zero's delicate handling. They were brave, but unprepared. The Zero was still deadly, but now, many of its pilots died before they could learn its secrets. A veteran once recalled, "They were boys with wings, and we sent them into storms." The birth of the Hellcat. Scene: Naval Factory. F-6F Hellcats rolling off the assembly line, gleaming blue steel under floodlights. Grumman engineers had studied every piece of wreckage from captured Zeros. They built their new fighter to survive its worst blows and strike harder. The F-6F Hellcat could dive faster, absorb hits, and climb higher. It had thicker armor, better guns, and, most importantly, self-sealing fuel tanks. In tests, it could outturn the Zero at high speed and survive damage that would destroy any Japanese plane. The first time Hellcats met Zeros in combat over the Gilbert Islands, the results were shocking. For every Hellcat shot down, 5 Zeros fell. Operation Vengeance. Scene: radio static jungle rain, an isolated runway in the Solomon Islands. April 18, 1943. A small squadron of American P-38s took off on a mission unlike any other. Their target: Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of Pearl Harbor. Flying low over the ocean, they ambushed Yamamoto's transport plane above Bougainville. The escorting Zeros fought bravely, but the Americans struck with deadly precision. Yamamoto's plane crashed into the jungle. The man who had once promised Japan a run of victories for 6 months was dead. The Empire's spirit dimmed that day, and the Zero's invincibility died with him. The shattered wing. By late 1943, Japan was bleeding from every front. The Zeros still fought courageously, over the Philippines, over the Marianas, over New Guinea. but they were being hunted. In the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Americans unleashed Operation Forager, and what followed was the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. Over 300 Zeros faced 450 Hellcats. The result? Only 29 American planes lost. More than 250 Japanese fighters destroyed. The sea below was littered with burning wreckage. The pilots who once ruled the Pacific were gone, lost to the waves. A new kind of war. For Japan, the loss of trained pilots was a disaster beyond recovery. The airfield stood empty, the flight schools quiet. But the emperor's orders were clear: fight on. No surrender. In desperation, the Japanese military began to embrace a dark new strategy: suicidal air attacks. Kamikaze units were formed, young pilots barely out of training, willing to crash their planes into enemy ships. It was a weapon born of desperation and of devotion. And among the aircraft chosen for this final duty was the Zero, the same plane that had once symbolized elegance and mastery, now turned into a tool of sacrifice, the American juggernaut. Meanwhile, the American war machine had become unstoppable. Factories worked 24 hours a day. Fuel, steel, and technology flowed in endless rivers toward the front. Pilots trained by the thousands. Aircraft carriers multiplied like islands of metal in the Pacific. And each new fighter, the Hellcat, Corsair, Mustang, was deadlier than the last. The skies that once belonged to Japan now thundered with Allied engines. The Hunter had become the hunted. The fall of Rabaul. Rabaul, Japan's mighty fortress in the South Pacific. For months, it had been untouchable, a symbol of Japanese power. But in late 1943, waves of American bombers and fighters descended upon it. The Zeros rose to meet them, exhausted, outnumbered, underfueled, and they were slaughtered. One Japanese pilot later wrote in his diary, "The sky was full of lightning. Every direction, fire. The gods have turned their faces from us." Within days, Rabaul's air defenses were gone. The once invincible fortress was silent. Fuel was scarce, pilots even scarcer. The Zero squadrons that once filled the skies were now shadows of their former glory, patched together from spare parts, flown by boys barely old enough to shave. They had no radar, no support, no chance. But still they flew. The spirit of Bushido. SFX, quiet wind, temple bells faintly echoing. In Japan's culture, surrender was not an option. The code of Bushido, the way of the warrior, taught that death in service of one's emperor was the highest honor. To die in battle was not failure, it was purity. And so, when Japan's leaders faced impossible odds, they turned to that ancient code once again. They created something the world had never seen before: the kamikaze. Men who would fly their planes, often the beloved Zero, straight into enemy ships. Human bombs, guided by faith. The birth of the kamikaze. Scene: candlelit briefing room. Young pilots kneeling before an officer. October 1944, as the Americans invaded Leyte Gulf, Vice Admiral Takahiro Onishi proposed the unthinkable. To save Japan, we must die for Japan. Let our deaths be the shield of the empire. From that day forward, the word kamikaze, divine wind, returned from legend to reality. Hundreds of young pilots volunteered. Many were barely 18 or 19 years old. They wrote farewell letters to their mothers, tied white headbands around their foreheads, and took flight, not to return. Echoes of defeat. Scene: slow motion, burning planes, empty runways, silent hangars. By 1944, the Zero, the pride of Japan, was a relic of another time. It could still fight, still kill, but it could no longer win. Every time it took off, it faced swarms of newer, faster, better-armed enemies. The same lightweight frame that had made it a legend now made it fragile. Its pilots were dying faster than they could be named. And in the cold skies over the Philippines, the Zero's story was reaching its end. By 1944, the rising sun was dimming. Japan's empire, once stretching from the Aleutians to New Guinea, was crumbling. Its navy shattered, its cities burning, and its skies no longer its own. The Zero, the pride of the Imperial Japanese Navy, once the hunter of the Pacific, was now the hunted. Yet, even in defeat, the Zero refused to vanish. It would find one final role, a role born from desperation, honor, and sacrifice. The Empire in retreat. Scene: aerial view of devastated islands. Black smoke rising, ships burning in harbors. Late 1944, the Philippines. American forces had returned, and Japan's empire was collapsing. Every day, Allied bombers rained destruction from above. Factories in Tokyo and Osaka were reduced to ashes. Their aircraft? The same machine that had once been Japan's greatest triumph. The Mitsubishi A6M Zero. Letters from the sky. Scene: soft Japanese flute music. Narration over paper being folded. Dear Father, I do not fear death. I fly tomorrow for the Emperor, for you, and for Japan. When my plane meets the enemy, I will smile. Please remember me as one who fulfilled his duty. Thousands of such letters were found after the war, each written with calm, unwavering handwriting, each carrying the same quiet dignity. These young men did not see themselves as killers. They saw themselves as protectors of their homeland, their families, their emperor. But history would remember them differently. The first strike, SFX, roaring wind, anti-aircraft fire, alarm sirens. October 25, 1944, the first official kamikaze attack. A formation of 5 Zeros dove toward the American fleet off the coast of the Philippines. 1 Zero, flown by Lieutenant Yukio Seki, slammed directly into the USS St. Lo, an escort carrier. The explosion tore through the deck. Within minutes, the ship sank. Over 100 American sailors died. The Japanese radios crackled with joy. For the first time in months, they had destroyed a carrier. To them, it was proof that the divine wind still blew. To the Americans, it was a glimpse of something terrifying, a weapon that could not be stopped because it did not fear death. The sky of fire. Scene: montage, Zeros taking off one by one at sunrise, cherry blossoms drifting in slow motion. In the months that followed, Japan launched wave after wave of kamikaze attacks. From Luzon to Okinawa, from the Philippines to the coast of Japan itself, the skies turned into a storm of sacrifice. The Zeros, stripped of guns and armor, carried 500-pound bombs. They flew low, hugging the waves, evading radar until the very last moment. Then, as the enemy ships appeared on the horizon, they climbed toward the sun, and dove. The explosions echoed across the Pacific. Ships burned, sailors screamed, and the world witnessed the darkest poetry of war. Human lives turned into living weapons. The cost of devotion. By war's end, nearly 3,800 kamikaze pilots had died. They destroyed or damaged over 300 Allied ships. But the cost was unbearable. Japan's youth, its future, was gone. And the Zero, once a symbol of mastery, had become a symbol of tragedy. American sailors called them angels of death. Japanese families called them sons of heaven. But no matter what name they bore, each flight was a prayer written in fire. The final missions. SFX, wind howling, faint whispers of pilots over static. Spring 1945, the final days. Tokyo lay in ruins. Fuel was almost gone, yet the Zeros still flew. At Okinawa, over 1,500 kamikaze sorties were launched. One after another, they fell, burning streaks across the sky. For every ship hit, dozens of planes were lost. For every victory, hundreds of lives ended. The once proud Zero, the Emperor's sword, was now a candle burning at both ends. And on August 15, 1945, when Emperor Hirohito's voice echoed across Japan, announcing surrender, the last remaining Zeros sat silent on broken runways. Their pilots gone, their mission complete. After the war. Scene: quiet hangar, sunlight shining on a rusted Zero fuselage. After the war, the world saw the Zero with mixed eyes. Some as a machine of terror, others as a masterpiece of engineering. Captured examples were studied by American engineers. One U.S. pilot, after flying a restored Zero, wrote, "It was the most graceful aircraft I ever touched, and I finally understood how dangerous beauty can be." In post-war Japan, the Zero became both a wound and a memory, a symbol of what was lost and of what could never be again. Its designer, Jiro Horikoshi, survived the war. When asked how he felt about the legacy of his creation, he quietly said, "All I wanted was to build something beautiful." The legacy of the Zero, SFX, slow piano notes, archival footage of surviving Zeros flying over calm seas. Today, a few restored Zeros still fly, their engines echoing faintly across air shows and museums. When they take off, people look up, not in fear but in awe, because the Zero story isn't just about war. It's about genius, courage, and the fragility of perfection. It reminds us that even in conflict, human beings can create things of stunning grace, and that beauty, when bound to destruction, always ends in tragedy.